I remember the day my world shattered with perfect clarity. It wasn't when our parents died, though that pain was unlike anything I'd ever known. No, it was 3 weeks later, sitting in Mr. Caldwell's office, the family attorney we'd known since childhood, when I discovered what betrayal truly felt like. "I'm sorry, Alex," he said, his voice dropping to that practiced tone of professional sympathy. "The will is quite clear. Your parents left everything to your siblings, Eliza and James. There's nothing allocated for you." The words hit me like physical blows. Nothing. Nothing for their youngest child who had spent the last 5 years caring for them through Mom's cancer and Dad's subsequent decline. Nothing for the one who had put medical school on hold, moved back home, and sacrificed everything while Eliza built her law practice in New York and James expanded his tech company in San Francisco. "There must be some mistake," I whispered, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. The mahogany walls of the office seemed to close in around me. Dad always said the estate would be divided equally. Mr. Caldwell, Bernard, as my father had called him, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "The will was amended 14 months ago. Your siblings were present when your parents signed it. 14 months. My mind raced. That was right after Mom's second round of chemo failed, when Dad started forgetting things. A flicker of something, was it guilt, crossed Bernard's face. "All I can verify is that your parents were deemed of sound mind when they signed." Sound mind? I felt heat rising to my face. Dad could barely remember what day it was. And Mom was on enough painkillers to— "Alex," he cut me off, glancing nervously at the closed door. "I understand this is difficult, but legally—" "Did you know?" I demanded, standing now, my hands gripping the edge of his desk. "When they changed it, when my siblings convinced our dying medicated parents to cut me out completely, did you know and say nothing while I was changing bedpans and administering medications around the clock?" His silence was answer enough. I don't remember leaving his office. I don't remember the drive home, to my parents' home, the sprawling Victorian where I'd grown up, where I'd returned to become their caregiver, where I'd held my mother's hand as she took her last breath just 5 weeks earlier. The home that would soon belong to my siblings who hadn't bothered to visit more than twice a year. What I do remember is stopping at the end of the long driveway, staring at the house through a blur of tears, and feeling something inside me fundamentally change. The shock and grief crystallized into something harder, colder, and more focused than I'd ever felt before. My phone rang. "Eliza." I let it go to voicemail. Then came a text. "Bernard called. We need to talk. James and I are flying in tomorrow." Of course they were. Now that their inheritance was secured, they could spare the time. I parked the car and walked through the front door, seeing the house with new eyes. The antique grandfather clock in the foyer that James had always coveted. The oil paintings Eliza had casually mentioned would look perfect in her Manhattan apartment. The family photos on the walls, decades of memories, of Christmases and birthdays and vacations, all of us smiling, all of us pretending to be a normal, loving family. What a cruel joke. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, the only space in the house that still felt like mine. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I finally let the tears come. Not the soft, sad tears of grief, but hot, angry tears that burned down my cheeks and tasted of betrayal. How long had they been planning this? Had they gone to our parents together, presenting a united front? What lies had they told to convince Mom and Dad that I deserved nothing, not even a keepsake, after sacrificing years of my life to care for them? My phone buzzed again. A text from James. "This is for the best, Alex. You know you were never good with money anyway. We'll make sure you're taken care of." Something snapped inside me. Taken care of? Like a family pet they'd inherited? Like a burdensome obligation? I hurled my phone against the wall, watching with grim satisfaction as the screen shattered. The sound echoed my broken heart, my shattered trust, my splintered family bonds. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my childhood room, I made a decision. I would not beg for what should rightfully have been mine. I would not crumble under the weight of their betrayal. I would rise from these ashes and build something so magnificent that they would choke on their own greed. And one day, when they least expected it, they would understand exactly what they had done. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the night gathering everything that mattered to me: photographs of happier times, the few pieces of jewelry Mom had given me personally, Dad's old watch that he'd pressed into my hand one lucid afternoon with a whispered, "Keep this safe for me, Allie." I packed my clothes, my books, my laptop, and the emergency cash I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer, $5,000 that suddenly represented my entire financial worth. By dawn, my car was packed. I took one last walk through the house, touching the familiar walls, breathing in the lingering scent of Mom's favorite roses in the entryway, saying a silent goodbye to the parents whose love I never doubted, even if their final act had been influenced by my siblings' manipulation. I was brewing a pot of coffee when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Looking out the kitchen window, I saw a sleek black town car crawling up the driveway, earlier than expected. My siblings had always been efficient when it came to claiming what they wanted. For a moment, I considered slipping out the back door, avoiding them entirely. But something steely in my spine refused to give them the satisfaction. I poured myself a cup of coffee and waited. Eliza entered first, immaculate as always in a tailored black pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and calculating eyes. James followed, his tech mogul casual look of expensive jeans and a cashmere sweater not quite disguising the tension in his shoulders. "Alex," Eliza said, her voice carrying that lawyer's precision, "we were worried when you didn't answer our calls." "Were you?" I took a slow sip of coffee, embracing the bitter taste. "That's funny, because I don't remember either of you being worried when Mom was undergoing experimental treatments or when Dad couldn't recognize his own children. I don't remember frantic calls then." James had the decency to look uncomfortable, running a hand through his artfully tousled hair. "Look, Alex, we know this is a shock." "A shock?" I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "Finding out my own siblings manipulated our dying parents into cutting me out of the will while I was downstairs preparing their medications. That's not a shock, James. That's a betrayal of biblical proportions." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "Always the pragmatist, always ready to control the narrative. You're being dramatic. Mom and Dad made their decision because they knew we would be better equipped to manage their estate. Your impulsive nature has always been a concern. My impulsive nature. The same nature that had impulsively put my life on hold to care for them when neither of my ambitious siblings could be bothered." "I see," I said quietly, setting down my coffee cup with exaggerated care. "And I suppose it was my impulsive nature that had me sleeping on a cot in Mom's hospital room for 3 months while you sent flowers from across the country. My impulsive nature that had me learning to administer injections and change medical dressings while you were both too busy to visit for the holidays." James at least had the grace to look away. Eliza just lifted her chin. "We all contribute in different ways," she said coldly. "Our careers allowed us to pay for the best medical care. Medical care that insurance covered," I cut in. "Try again, Eliza. This isn't productive," James interjected, always the peacemaker when it suited him. "What's done is done. We're here to discuss transitional arrangements. We're not monsters, Alex. We know you need time to find a new place, and we're prepared to be generous." Generous. The word hung in the air between us, dripping with condescension. "How generous?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. They exchanged a look. That sibling telepathy that had always excluded me, the youngest by 7 years, the afterthought child. "We're prepared to offer you a monthly stipend for the next year," Eliza said, slipping into her negotiation voice. "And you can take any personal items that—" "Don't bother," I interrupted, gesturing to my packed car visible through the kitchen window. "I've already taken everything that matters to me." Their eyes widened simultaneously, a rare moment of synchronized, genuine emotion. "You're leaving?" James asked. "Just like that?" "Just like that," I confirmed, standing up. "The house is all yours. Divide it up however you want. Fight over Mom's china and Dad's first edition books. It doesn't matter to me anymore." "Alex, be reasonable," Eliza said, her controlled facade cracking slightly. "Where will you go? What will you do?" I smiled then, and something in my expression made them both take an instinctive step back. "That's no longer your concern," I said quietly. "You wanted me out of the will? Congratulations. You've also pushed me out of your lives." I walked past them, pausing at the doorway to deliver one final truth. "You know what the sad part is? If you had just talked to me, if you had been honest about wanting more of the inheritance, I would have shared. That's what family does. But you chose greed and deception, and one day I promise you'll realize exactly what that choice cost you. I left them standing in our parents' kitchen, surrounded by the wealth they'd schemed for, looking strangely diminished in the morning light. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, tears streamed down my face. But they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of rage, of determination, of a promise I was making to myself and the memory of my parents. I would rebuild. I would rise. And one day, my siblings would understand exactly what they had thrown away. I drove aimlessly for hours, the weight of homeless reality settling over me like a cold blanket. At 28 years old, I had nothing but a car full of possessions, $5,000 in cash, and a medical education interrupted halfway through. No home, no family, and a resume gap that would raise eyebrows at every job interview. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a modest motel on the outskirts of town. $39 a night. I could afford 11 weeks at this rate before my money ran out completely. The thought sent a wave of panic through me, but I pushed it down. Panic wouldn't serve me now. Strategy would. The motel room was clean but depressing. Faded floral bedspread, laminate furniture, the lingering smell of industrial cleaner barely masking years of cigarette smoke. I sat on the edge of the bed and took stock of my assets, my laptop, my medical knowledge, my network from before I'd dropped everything to care for my parents. And most importantly, the drive now burning inside me, not just to survive, but to thrive so spectacularly that my siblings would choke on their betrayal. I opened my laptop and began to make lists. People to contact, skills to leverage, opportunities to explore. As the night deepened, my plan began to take shape. Not just a plan for immediate survival, but a long-term strategy for the kind of success that would make headlines. The inheritance that should have been mine was worth approximately $3 million. The Victorian house, my parents' investments, and the life insurance policies. Split between my siblings, they'd each walk away with about $1.5 million. Substantial, but not enough to fundamentally change the trajectories of their already successful lives. I would build something worth 10 times that amount. And I would do it within 5 years. The goal was audacious, perhaps even delusional given my current circumstances. But as I wrote it down, something settled in my chest, a cold certainty that this wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. I fell asleep as dawn was breaking, my laptop still open beside me, my future reduced to bullet points and timelines on a digital page. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since before my parents got sick. I showered, dressed in the most professional outfit I'd packed, and headed to the bank where my parents had done business for decades. Mr. Richards, the bank manager, had known my family since before I was born. His face lit up when he saw me, then quickly sobered as he remembered the recent funeral. "Alex, I'm so sorry about your parents. They were wonderful people." "Thank you," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I appreciate that. I'm actually here to open a new account and to ask for some advice." Over the next hour, I explained my situation. Not the betrayal, but my determination to start fresh and build something substantial. I could see the sympathy in his eyes, the unasked questions about why I wasn't living in my parents' home, why I was starting over with so little. "I've always admired your drive," he said finally. "And your parents often spoke of your intelligence and work ethic. What exactly are you thinking of pursuing?" I leaned forward. "Healthcare technology. I want to develop software that bridges the gap between medical providers and home caregivers, something I realized was desperately needed during my parents' illnesses." His eyes sharpened with interest. "That's actually quite timely. The healthcare tech sector is booming." "I know. I've been researching it for months between caring for my parents." This wasn't entirely true. I'd spent exactly 6 hours researching it last night, but the confidence in my voice never wavered. "Do you have a business plan? Seed capital?" "I'm working on the business plan," I admitted. "As for seed capital, that's part of why I'm here. I have $5,000 to my name right now, but what I need is guidance on how to leverage that into something more substantial." He leaned back, studying me with new eyes. "Normally, I'd say that's not enough to start a tech company. But," he paused, seeming to make a decision, "I know some people who might be interested in what you're proposing. Angel investors who specialize in healthcare innovation. Would you be open to meeting them? Hope, the first real hope I'd felt since sitting in Mr. Caldwell's office, bloomed in my chest. I would be very open to that. Good. Let me make some calls. He hesitated, then added, Alex, I don't know what happened with your family's estate, and it's not my place to ask. But whatever you're going through, your parents would be proud of how you're handling it. I swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in my throat. Thank you. That means more than you know. I left the bank with a new account, a tentative meeting scheduled with potential investors for the following week, and something I hadn't expected to find so soon after my world collapsed. Purpose. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparation. I researched healthcare technology trends until my eyes burned. I drafted and redrafted a business plan. I created preliminary mock-ups of what my software might look like. I practiced my pitch in the mirror of my motel room until I could deliver it in my sleep. And I steadfastly ignored the increasingly frequent calls and texts from my siblings. Alex, this is childish. Call us back. Eliza, hey, we're worried about you. Let us know you're okay. James, the lawyer needs your signature on some paperwork. Stop being difficult. Eliza, Mom and Dad wouldn't want this division between us. James. That last one nearly broke me. How dare he invoke our parents to manipulate me? The same parents whose trust he had betrayed while they were at their most vulnerable? I channeled my rage into my work, refining my vision for a company that would revolutionize home healthcare coordination. By the time the meeting with the investors arrived, I had transformed from a grieving, betrayed sibling into a focused, passionate entrepreneur, at least on the outside. Inside, the wound still bled, fueling every late night, every meticulous detail of my planning. The meeting took place in a private dining room at the city's most exclusive restaurant. Mr. Richards introduced me to 3 potential investors: Victoria Chen, a former pharmaceutical executive who had shifted to venture capital; Marcus Blackwood, old money with a keen interest in healthcare innovation following his wife's battle with MS; and Dominic Russo, a serial entrepreneur who had made his first fortune in medical devices. They were polite but reserved as we ordered drinks, making small talk about the weather and local events. I could feel them assessing me, this unknown quantity, this young person with no track record in business, no prototype, and no seed money of my own. When the time came for my pitch, I took a deep breath and thought of my parents, not as they were in their final months, confused and manipulated, but as they had been throughout my childhood, supportive, loving, believing in my potential even when I doubted myself. Thank you all for meeting with me today, I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. I'm here to discuss a critical gap in our healthcare system, one that costs lives, depletes resources, and causes immeasurable suffering for patients and their families. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my vision, a comprehensive platform that would connect doctors, nurses, home health aides, pharmacists, and family caregivers in real time, ensuring that everyone involved in a patient's care had access to the same information, could communicate efficiently, and could prevent the dangerous gaps that I had personally witnessed while caring for my parents. I shared specific examples from my experience. The time a medication change wasn't properly communicated between the oncologist and the primary care physician, resulting in a dangerous interaction that sent my mother to the ER. The constant struggle to coordinate appointments with specialists who never seemed to talk to each other. The endless hours I'd spent on the phone trying to get test results sent from one doctor to another. This isn't just a business opportunity, I concluded. It's a chance to transform how we care for our most vulnerable populations. And with the aging baby boomer generation, the market for this solution isn't just large, it's exponentially growing. Silence followed my presentation. I resisted the urge to fill it with nervous chatter, instead meeting each of their gazes steadily. Finally, Victoria Chen spoke. Your passion is evident, and your first-hand experience gives you insights many tech entrepreneurs lack. But passion and personal experience aren't enough. What makes you qualified to execute this vision? It was the question I'd been dreading, the one that exposed my greatest vulnerability. Honestly, I'm not fully qualified yet, I admitted. I have half a medical degree, no formal business training, and limited technical expertise. What I do have is intimate knowledge of the problem, a clear vision for the solution, and the determination to assemble a team that can execute it flawlessly." Marcus Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "That's refreshingly honest." "I believe in transparency," I said. "The same transparency that our healthcare system desperately lacks. I don't have all the skills needed to build this company alone, but I know exactly what skills are required and how to find people who possess them." Dominic Russo leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. "And the competition? There are several players already attempting to solve aspects of this problem." "Yes, but they're approaching it from either a purely medical perspective or a purely technical one," I countered. "None are addressing the comprehensive coordination needs that span from hospital to home, from medical professional to family caregiver. They're creating silos where we need bridges." The questions continued, growing increasingly specific and technical. I answered what I could with confidence and acknowledged what I couldn't with honesty. By the time dessert arrived, the energy in the room had shifted. They were no longer humoring Mr. Richards' protege, they were engaging with a potential business partner. As the meeting concluded, Victoria handed me her card. "You need to refine your business model and bring on a technical co-founder, but I'm interested in continuing the conversation. Call my office next week." Marcus and Dominic expressed similar cautious interest. Not commitments, but open doors, which was more than I had dared to hope for from this first meeting. Outside the restaurant, Mr. Richards clasped my shoulder. "That went well. Much better than I expected, frankly. Thank you for arranging it," I said, the adrenaline of the presentation finally ebbing, leaving me suddenly exhausted, "and for believing in me enough to put your own reputation on the line. Sometimes you can just tell when someone has what it takes," he replied. "Get some rest, refine your plan based on their feedback, and keep moving forward. This is just the beginning, just the beginning." As I drove back to my motel room, those words echoed in my mind. Just the beginning of my new life. Just the beginning of my journey from betrayed sibling to successful entrepreneur. Just the beginning of the long game that would eventually bring my brother and sister face to face with the consequences of their actions. I slept like the dead that night, emotionally and physically drained from the performance of confidence I'd maintained throughout the meeting. But when I woke the next morning, something had shifted inside me. The plan was no longer just a reaction to betrayal, it had taken on a life of its own. I genuinely believed in what I was creating. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into developing every aspect of my business concept. I found a small apartment I could afford month to month, a step up from the motel, but still humble enough to stretch my limited funds. I lived on ramen and coffee, pouring every spare dollar into building a professional website and creating a more sophisticated prototype to show potential investors. I reached out to former classmates from medical school, reconnecting with those who had gone into health informatics or medical technology. One of them, Raj Patel, expressed particular interest in my concept. "This is addressing a real pain point," he said during a video call, examining the mock-ups I'd created. "I've been working on something tangentially related at my current job, but your vision is more comprehensive. Would you consider coming on as a technical advisor?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. "I could offer equity in lieu of payment initially." He hesitated, then nodded. "Let me see the business plan. If it's as solid as these mock-ups, I might be interested in more than just advising." 2 months after being cut out of my parents' will, I had a technical co-founder, a functioning prototype, and 3 angel investors interested enough to schedule follow-up meetings. My $5,000 was dwindling rapidly, but the pieces were falling into place faster than I had dared to hope. Then came the legal letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, the law firm's logo embossed on heavy cream stationery. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, already knowing it couldn't be good news. The letter was from Eliza's law firm, though not written by her personally. Even she wouldn't be that brazen. It outlined a cease and desist regarding my business venture, claiming that I was using proprietary ideas that had been discussed within the family while our parents were alive. It was absurd, completely fabricated. My parents had never been involved in healthcare technology, and we had certainly never discussed anything remotely similar to my current business concept as a family. But it was also a power play that I should have anticipated. Of course, Eliza would have been investigating what I was up to. Of course, she would attempt to block my progress using her legal resources. And of course, the threat alone would be enough to spook potential investors if they caught wind of it. I called the one person I knew I could trust for honest legal advice, my college roommate Sarah, now a junior partner at a competing firm across town. "This is bullshit," she said bluntly after reviewing the letter. "They have no case." But it could scare off my investors," I finished for her. "It could drag on long enough to drain my non-existent resources." "Exactly." She set the letter down, her expression grim. "This isn't about winning a legal battle. It's about intimidation." "What do you suggest?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Let me draft a response. Something that pushes back firmly but doesn't escalate to the point of litigation. And in the meantime, be completely transparent with your investors about this. If they hear it from you first, with a solid plan for addressing it, it won't seem like you're hiding something when Eliza inevitably reaches out to them directly." "She would do that?" Sarah gave me a look. "Based on what you've told me about her? Absolutely she would." That night, alone in my apartment, I allowed myself a rare moment of doubt. Was I being naive, thinking I could outmaneuver a successful attorney and a tech entrepreneur with vastly more resources and connections than I had? Was I setting myself up for an even more crushing defeat? I pulled out the watch my father had given me, his prized possession, the one thing he'd made sure I received personally, perhaps knowing what my siblings were planning. The inscription on the back read, "Time reveals truth. Love always, Dad. Time reveals truth." I traced the words with my finger, finding strength in them. My parents had known the truth of who I was, regardless of what had happened with the will, and in time, the truth of what I was capable of would be revealed to everyone, especially my siblings. The next morning, I called Victoria Chen and requested an urgent meeting. Better to face this head-on than wait for Eliza to make her move. Victoria agreed to meet for coffee that afternoon. Her expression was carefully neutral as I explained the situation, showing her both the cease and desist letter and Sarah's drafted response. "Family business disputes are red flags for investors," she said after a moment. "They tend to get messy and emotional." "I understand that," I acknowledged, "and I wanted you to hear about this from me directly. This isn't a legitimate legal concern. It's an attempt to derail my progress because my success threatens my siblings in ways that go beyond business." She studied me, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "Tell me the real story, Alex. No polished version, no strategic omissions. If I'm going to back you through this, I need to know exactly what I'm getting into." For the first time, I shared the full truth. The years I'd spent caring for my parents, the shock of discovering I'd been cut out of the will, the calculated betrayal by siblings who had manipulated our dying parents while I was changing their bedsheets and administering their medications. Victoria listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "So this company," she said when I finished, "it didn't start as just a business opportunity. It started as revenge." I met her gaze unflinchingly. "It started as survival. It evolved into determination. The desire to prove my siblings wrong is certainly part of my motivation, but the company itself, the solution I'm building, comes from a genuine need I witnessed firsthand. The fact that its success might eventually force my siblings to face the consequences of their actions is a separate matter." She was silent for a long moment, turning her coffee cup in small circles on the table. "My father cut me out of his will," she said finally, the words so unexpected that I nearly spilled my own coffee. "He left everything to my brother because, in his traditional Chinese mindset, the family business should go to the son. I was expected to marry well and be taken care of by my husband." She smiled thinly. "Instead, I built a competing company that eventually acquired his. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew I could do it better. He admitted as much before he died." Hope flickered in my chest. "So, you understand?" "I understand precisely," she confirmed, "which is why I'm still interested in investing, with conditions. First, we bring on a seasoned CEO who can navigate these waters while you serve as founder and chief product officer. Second, we create a corporate structure that shields the company from any personal legal attacks. And third," her eyes held mine intently, "you focus on building something extraordinary for the right reasons. Success is the best revenge, but only if you don't lose yourself to bitterness in the process." I extended my hand across the table. "I can agree to those terms." As she shook my hand, I felt a shift in the dynamic. No longer just investor and entrepreneur, but two people who understood what it meant to rise from the ashes of family betrayal. True to her word, Victoria introduced me to Roland Hayes, a former healthcare executive with multiple successful exits under his belt. He was in his early 60s, looking for one last significant venture before retirement, and immediately grasped both the market potential of my concept and the personal complexities surrounding it. "Family drama doesn't interest me," he said during our first meeting. "Results do. If you can deliver on the product vision and work effectively with the team we build, your personal motivation is your own business." With Roland as CEO, Victoria's investment firm leading our seed round, and Raj as CTO, Parker Health Technologies was officially born, named for my mother's maiden name, a private tribute she would have appreciated. Eliza's legal threats dissipated in the face of the formidable legal team Victoria's firm provided. The cease and desist was revealed for what it was, a baseless intimidation tactic. When Sarah delivered our response, professionally devastating in its point-by-point dismantling of their claims, no further action followed from my siblings' side. For the moment they had retreated. But I harbored no illusions that they had surrendered. The first year of building Parker Health Technologies passed in a blur of 18-hour workdays, product iterations, investor meetings, and gradual team expansion. I lived and breathed the company, partly because I believed in our mission, and partly because work was the only thing that kept the darker thoughts at bay. Occasionally, news of my siblings would reach me through mutual acquaintances or social media. Eliza had made partner at her firm. James had launched a new product line. They had sold our parents' house, the home where I'd grown up, where I'd cared for Mom and Dad in their final years, and split the proceeds without so much as informing me beforehand. Each update was a fresh cut, but I used the pain to fuel my focus. Rather than dwelling on what they were doing with their inherited wealth, I channeled my energy into creating something new, something that would eclipse anything they had built or bought. 15 months after our initial funding, we launched the beta version of the Parker Health Coordination Platform. 10 hospitals signed on for the pilot program, along with dozens of home healthcare agencies. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with medical professionals and family caregivers alike praising the intuitive interface and seamless communication features. Tech and healthcare publications began to take notice. An article in Healthcare Innovation highlighted our unique approach to bridging the hospital-to-home care gap. Silicon Valley Monitor included me in their 30 under 30 list of healthcare entrepreneurs to watch. And then, inevitably, my siblings noticed too. The email from James came 2 years to the day after I'd walked out of our parents' house with nothing but a car full of possessions and a heart full of betrayal. "Congratulations on your company's success. I always knew you had it in you. Perhaps we should catch up sometime? There's a lot to discuss." I stared at the message for a long time, emotions warring within me. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Our Series A funding round had just closed at $12 million, valuing Parker Health at nearly $50 million, a fact that had been reported in several business publications. Now suddenly, James wanted to catch up. I deleted the email without responding. 3 days later, Eliza called. I let it go to voicemail. "Alex, it's been 2 years of this childish silent treatment. We're still family, regardless of our disagreements about the will. Your company is doing well. Congratulations. But don't you think it's time to move past this? Call me back. Childish. Disagreements. Family." Her choice of words revealed how little she understood or acknowledged what she had done. I didn't call her back. Instead, I focused on our upcoming product expansion. The pilot program had yielded valuable insights, and we were preparing to release version 2.0 with enhanced features for medication management and integration with major electronic health record systems. Our team had grown to 28 people, occupying an entire floor of a sleek office building downtown. My personal life, however, remained largely non-existent. I lived in a modest apartment despite my increasingly comfortable financial situation, invested most of my salary back into company stock, and rarely took time off. Victoria had warned me about this during one of our regular advisory meetings. "You're building an impressive company," she said, "but you're in danger of losing perspective. Success means nothing if you don't occasionally step back to enjoy it." She was right, of course, but enjoying life felt somehow like letting my guard down, like giving my siblings the satisfaction of thinking I had moved on from their betrayal. The truth was I hadn't. Beneath my professional accomplishments, the wound remained raw, informing every decision, driving me forward when others might have taken time to rest. Then came the opportunity we'd been waiting for, a chance to pitch Parker Health to Medicor, one of the largest hospital networks in the country. If they adopted our platform, it would transform our company overnight, validating our approach at a scale that would make us the undisputed leader in healthcare coordination technology. The pitch meeting was scheduled for their headquarters in Chicago. Roland would lead the business aspects, and I would present the product vision and technical capabilities. We prepared exhaustively, anticipating every possible question, refining our presentation until it flowed seamlessly. The night before the meeting, I was reviewing my talking points in my hotel room when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. Hello? Is this Alex Parker? An unfamiliar male voice. Yes, who's calling? My name is Dr. William Chen. I'm the Chief Medical Information Officer at Medicor. I apologize for calling so late and from my personal phone. My heart raced. Why would an executive from Medicor be calling me directly the night before our pitch? Not a problem, Dr. Chen. What can I do for you? There was a slight hesitation on the line. This is somewhat awkward, but I felt I should give you a heads up. I just left a dinner where your sister was present. My blood went cold. My sister? Eliza Parker? She mentioned she was your sister. She's representing a healthcare technology company that's apparently developing a platform very similar to yours. She suggested we should delay any decisions about new vendors until we've had a chance to review their offering as well. The room seemed to tilt around me. Of course they wouldn't stop at legal intimidation. Of course they would try to undermine the biggest opportunity my company had faced to date. I see, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage coursing through me. Thank you for letting me know. To be clear, Dr. Chen continued, this doesn't affect our interest in your presentation tomorrow. Your solution has impressive references, and we're genuinely excited to learn more. I just thought you should be prepared. I appreciate your candor, I said. If I may ask, which company is my sister representing? Integrated Care Solutions, he replied. Apparently a new venture between her law firm and your brother's technology company. She presented herself as their legal counsel, but she was definitely making a competitive pitch. After thanking Dr. Chen again and ending the call, I sat motionless on the edge of the hotel bed, my mind racing. Integrated Care Solutions. My siblings had created a competing company, clearly designed to capitalize on the market validation Parker Health had established. They were attempting to use their connections and resources to undercut us, just as we were gaining significant traction. The betrayal felt fresh again, a wound reopened just as it had begun to scar over. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred, a cold, calculating determination that had been forged in the crucible of their first betrayal and tempered by 2 years of single-minded focus. They thought they could outmaneuver me? They thought their hastily assembled copycat could compete with the platform we had built through thousands of hours of development and real-world testing. They thought wrong. I called Roland immediately, waking him from a sound sleep to explain the situation. His reaction was surprisingly calm. So we're facing a competitive threat from a company with no track record, no existing product, and no healthcare expertise beyond what they might have gleaned from public information about our platform? Alex, this isn't a crisis, it's an annoyance. It's my siblings, I reminded him. They have resources and connections. And we have a 2-year head start, validated technology, and actual customers singing our praises. Trust me, this changes nothing about tomorrow's presentation except perhaps adding a slide about our unique development journey and established market position. He was right from a business perspective. But from a personal perspective, this new attack from my siblings had awakened something in me that had been dormant for months. A fierce desire not just to succeed, but to definitively win. I spent half the night revising my portion of the presentation, not to address the competitive threat directly, but to emphasize the depth of understanding and personal experience that had informed every aspect of our platform's design. By dawn, I had a compelling narrative that no copycat company could possibly match, regardless of their funding or connections. The presentation to Medicor's executive team went even better than we had hoped. I spoke with genuine passion about watching my parents struggle through a fragmented healthcare system, about the communication breakdowns that had repeatedly compromised their care, about the burden placed on family caregivers trying to coordinate between multiple specialists. Parker Health wasn't born in a boardroom or coding boot camp, I told them. It was born at my mother's bedside, watching brilliant medical professionals work in silos while patients and families fell through the cracks. Every feature, every workflow, every design choice comes from lived experience and 2 years of refining those insights with actual users. The room was silent when I finished, several executives nodding in understanding. Dr. Chen, who had given me the warning call the night before, leaned forward. What would implementation look like across our network? We're talking about 17 hospitals and over 100 affiliated clinics. Roland smoothly took over, outlining our phased approach to enterprise implementation. I watched the executives' reactions, noting their engagement, their thoughtful questions, their increasing enthusiasm as the full capabilities of our platform became clear. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, what had been scheduled as an initial introduction had evolved into detailed implementation discussions. The CFO was already talking about budget allocation for the current fiscal year rather than the next. The CEO himself walked us to the elevator. "We've been looking for exactly this solution," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Expect to hear from our procurement team within the week." In the elevator, Roland and I maintained professional composure. In the taxi back to the hotel, we exchanged a single look of triumph. And in the privacy of my hotel room, I finally allowed myself a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, not just for the business success, but for the personal vindication. My siblings had tried to erase me from our family legacy, thinking I would disappear quietly into failure and obscurity. Instead, I had built something meaningful, something valuable, something that would help countless families avoid the very struggles I had faced alone while caring for our parents. The contract with Medicor was signed 3 weeks later, a 5-year deal worth $45 million, with options to expand to their international facilities. It was the kind of validation that transformed Parker Health from a promising startup to an industry leader overnight. The press coverage was extensive, with healthcare and business publications featuring profiles of our company and my personal journey from caregiver to entrepreneur. I was careful in interviews, never mentioning my siblings or the will, focusing instead on the inspiration I had drawn from caring for my parents. But those who knew the full story, Victoria, Roland, Raj, and a handful of others, understood the deeper significance of this achievement. 6 months after the Medicor deal, at Parker Health's 3rd anniversary celebration, Victoria raised her champagne glass in a private toast. "To building success from the ashes of betrayal," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "Your parents would be proud." I nodded, emotion tightening my throat. "I like to think so." "And your siblings?" she asked, her eyes shrewd. "Have they tried to contact you since their competitive venture failed to gain traction?" I thought about the increasingly desperate emails and calls I'd continued to ignore, the LinkedIn connection requests I'd declined, the mutual friends who had been enlisted to broker a reconciliation. "They have," I acknowledged. "But I'm not ready." "Will you ever be?" It was a fair question, one I asked myself regularly as Parker Health grew and my own financial security became undeniable. The company was now valued at over $200 million. My personal stake, even after dilution from multiple funding rounds, was worth nearly $40 million on paper. The inheritance that had been stolen from me, approximately $1 million, now seemed almost trivial in comparison. But it had never really been about the money. "Maybe someday," I told Victoria, "when I'm certain they understand exactly what they did, not just to me, but to our parents' memory and to the trust that should exist between siblings." She nodded thoughtfully. "Just don't wait too long. Revenge keeps you warm at night, but reconciliation brings peace. And you've earned your peace, Alex." Had I? Sometimes in rare quiet moments between meetings and product reviews and investor updates, I questioned what was driving me forward. Was it still the desire to prove my siblings wrong? Was it genuine passion for the company we were building? Or had the line between those motivations blurred so completely that they had become inseparable? The answer came unexpectedly, 4 years after I had walked away from my parents' house with nothing but determination and rage to fuel me. I was scheduled to deliver a keynote address at the National Healthcare Innovation Conference, a prestigious speaking engagement that represented yet another milestone in Parker Health's ascent. The conference was being held in San Francisco, James's home territory, but that hadn't factored into my decision to accept the invitation. The morning of my speech, I was reviewing my notes in the hotel restaurant when a familiar voice froze me in place. "Hello, Alex." I looked up to find James standing beside my table, looking simultaneously confident and uncertain, a combination only he could manage. He was dressed in his typical casual luxury style, but there were new lines around his eyes, a slight slump to his shoulders that hadn't been there 4 years ago. For a moment, I couldn't speak, the shock of seeing him after so long rendering me temporarily mute. "May I sit?" he asked when I didn't respond. I should have said no. I should have told him to leave. I should have maintained the wall of silence that had protected me from reopening old wounds. Instead, I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat, his movements careful, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "You look well," he said. "Success suits you." "What do you want, James?" My voice came out colder than I had intended, but I made no effort to soften it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache with unwanted nostalgia for simpler times, for the big brother who had taught me to ride a bike and build model rockets before ambition and greed had twisted him into someone unrecognizable. "I want to apologize," he said simply. "What Eliza and I did was unforgivable. I've spent 4 years telling myself we were justified, that we knew better how to manage the estate, that you would have squandered your share. But those were lies I told to avoid facing the truth. We were greedy and selfish, and we betrayed not just you, but Mom and Dad's trust as well." I stared at him, searching his face for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Finding none, I still remained wary. "Why now, James? Is it because Parker Health is successful? Because I'm no longer the little sibling you can dismiss and control?" He flinched visibly at that. "I deserve that. But no, it's not because of your success, though I am genuinely proud of what you've built." He hesitated, then continued quietly. "It's because Dad came to me in a dream 3 nights ago." He didn't say anything, just looked at me with such disappointment that I woke up crying. I haven't been able to shake it since. Despite myself, I felt a lump forming in my throat. It sounded exactly like something our father would do, communicate volumes with just a look, even from beyond the grave. "Where's Eliza in all this?" I asked, deflecting from the emotion threatening to overtake me. "Still maintaining that cutting me out was for my own good?" James grimaced. "Eliza is struggling." The failure of integrated care solutions hit her hard. She invested a significant portion of her inheritance in it, convinced we could replicate your success through sheer force of will and connections. When it became clear we couldn't, she had to face some uncomfortable truths about herself. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his candor. "And you? What uncomfortable truths have you faced, James?" He met my gaze directly for the first time. "That I became someone our parents would be ashamed of. That I allowed ambition and greed to override the values they raised us with. That I failed as a brother in the most fundamental way possible." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, but 4 years of built-up resentment couldn't be dismissed with a single apology, no matter how heartfelt. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But I'm not ready to forgive either of you. What you did." I shook my head, struggling to articulate the depth of the betrayal. "It wasn't just about the money, James. It was about erasing my contribution, about devaluing the years I gave up to care for them when neither of you could be bothered to even visit regularly." "I know," he said quietly. "Believe me, I know. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. I'm just asking for a chance to start rebuilding whatever might be salvageable between us." I looked at my watch, buying time to compose myself. "I have to give a keynote in an hour." "I know that too," he admitted. "I'll be in the audience. I registered for the conference specifically to hear you speak, to see the amazing things you've accomplished despite our efforts to hold you back." The thought of him watching my professional triumph brought a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a strange sadness for all that had been lost between us. For the family we should have been, for the support we should have given each other after our parents died, rather than the betrayal that had driven us apart. I need to prepare, I said, gathering my notes and standing. James rose as well. Of course. I didn't mean to intrude. Just think about what I said. Perhaps we could have dinner sometime when you're ready. I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing both the brother I had loved and the man who had betrayed me existing simultaneously in the same person. It was a disorienting double vision that I wasn't equipped to reconcile in the moment. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. He nodded, accepting this small concession with visible relief. That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Alex. As he turned to leave, something compelled me to ask one last question. James? If Parker Health had failed, if I had failed, would you still be here apologizing? He paused, considering the question with surprising thoughtfulness. I'd like to think so, he said after a moment. But the truth is, your success forced me to confront what I'd done in a way that might not have happened otherwise. You didn't just prove us wrong about you, you proved me wrong about myself. About who I thought I was versus who I actually am. It was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I delivered my keynote speech an hour later, speaking to a packed auditorium about the future of healthcare coordination and Parker Health's role in shaping that future. From the stage, I could see James sitting in the middle section, listening intently, occasionally nodding at points that resonated. His presence should have been distracting. Instead, it provided an unexpected clarity. As I described our company's mission and the real-world impact we were already having on patient outcomes, I realized with sudden certainty that Parker Health had evolved far beyond its origins as a vehicle for personal vindication. It had become something meaningful and important in its own right, a genuine solution to a critical healthcare challenge, a company with values and purpose that transcended my personal journey. The realization was both liberating and sobering. Parker Health was no longer just my redemption story. It was the collective achievement of our growing team, the embodiment of a vision that had expanded far beyond proving my siblings wrong. This didn't mean I was ready to forgive James and Eliza. The wound they had inflicted was too deep, the years of silence too significant, to be healed by a single conversation or apology. But perhaps, I acknowledged as I concluded my speech to enthusiastic applause, it was time to consider what healing might look like, not for their sake, but for my own. After the keynote, I found myself surrounded by conference attendees eager to discuss potential partnerships, integration opportunities, and implementation strategies. James kept his distance, watching from the periphery as I navigated the professional attention with practiced ease. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached again, this time holding out a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "I brought this for you," he said. "It's not a peace offering. There isn't anything valuable enough for that. But I thought you should have it." Curious despite myself, I accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal I recognized immediately, our father's idea journal, where he had recorded thoughts, quotes, and observations throughout his life. I had looked for it after his death, but assumed it had been lost in the chaos of his final months. "He gave it to me for safekeeping when he first got sick," James explained. "I think he intended for me to share it with all of us, but..." He trailed off, the implication clear. He had kept this treasured item for himself, just as he and Eliza had kept everything else. I opened the journal to a random page, recognizing our father's distinctive handwriting. The true measure of a person isn't found in what they accumulate, but in what they build, what they give, and who they lift up along the way. Material wealth is fleeting. Legacy of character is eternal. My eyes burned with sudden tears. It was so perfectly, painfully like him. The wisdom he had tried to instill in all of us, the values that James and Eliza had temporarily abandoned in their grab for material inheritance. "Thank you for this," I said softly, closing the journal and holding it against my chest. "It means more than you know." James nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "There's more where that came from. Personal items of moms and dads that should have been shared. Whenever you're ready, just say the word." It wasn't complete reconciliation. It wasn't even forgiveness. Not yet. But as I stood there holding my father's journal, with my successful company's name on banners throughout the conference center, and my brother making his first genuine attempt at amends, I felt something shift inside me. The need for revenge, for proving my siblings wrong so dramatically that they would choke on their regret, had sustained me through the darkest days after their betrayal. It had provided the fuel I needed to start building something from nothing. But somewhere along the way, that fuel had been supplemented and gradually replaced by genuine passion for the company itself, by pride in what we were creating, by satisfaction in the positive impact we were having on healthcare delivery across the country. I had set out to build an empire that would make my siblings regret their betrayal. Instead, I had built something far more valuable, a life and a company defined not by what had been taken from me, but by what I had created in response. As I looked at James, I realized I no longer needed him or Eliza to suffer for what they had done. Their regret, their failed competitive venture, their belated recognition of their wrongdoing, these were simply natural consequences of their actions, not punishments I needed to engineer or witness. "I'm having dinner with some of the conference speakers tonight," I said, making a split-second decision. "But I'm free tomorrow evening if you'd like to talk more then." The surprise and hope that crossed his face confirmed I had made the right choice, not for him, but for myself. For my own healing. For my own ability to move forward without the weight of calculated resentment that I had carried for 4 long years. "I'd like that very much," he said. "Just name the time and place." As I walked away, the journal tucked securely under my arm, I felt lighter than I had in years. The empire I had built would continue to grow and thrive, but it would do so fueled by purpose rather than pain, by vision rather than vendetta. My siblings had shut me out of the will, thinking they were depriving me of my rightful inheritance. Instead, they had inadvertently forced me to create something far greater than anything I would have inherited, not just in financial terms, but in purpose, impact, and personal growth. I had built my own empire, and whether they ever fully understood the magnitude of their mistake was no longer the point. I had never needed their approval or acceptance. I had needed only to prove to myself that their betrayal hadn't defined me, that I was capable of rising from those ashes and building something magnificent on my own terms. Mission accomplished. The dinner with James the following evening was awkward at first, both of us tiptoeing around years of silence and hurt. We met at a small Italian restaurant, neutral territory, where the dim lighting and quiet atmosphere gave us privacy without feeling too intimate. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up," he admitted after we ordered. "I wasn't entirely sure either," I replied honestly. "But I've been carrying this anger for 4 years, James. It's exhausting." He nodded slowly, turning his wine glass between his fingers. "I can only imagine. Though I've carried my own burden, not nearly as justified as yours, but heavy nonetheless." "Guilt?" I asked, more curious than accusatory. "That, and watching you build something remarkable while knowing I had tried to hold you back." He met my gaze directly. "The bitter irony is that if we had shared the inheritance equally, Parker Health might never have existed. Our betrayal inadvertently pushed you toward greater success than any of us could have imagined." The observation struck me with its accuracy. If I had received my portion of the inheritance, roughly $1 million, would I have been motivated to build a company now valued at over $200 million? Or would I have returned to medical school, eventually becoming a doctor as I'd originally planned? "That doesn't justify what you did," I said. "Of course not," he agreed quickly. "Nothing could. I'm just acknowledging the strange way things work out sometimes." I studied my brother's face, looking for the manipulative, greedy sibling who had conspired to rob me of my inheritance. Instead, I saw someone older, humbler, and genuinely regretful. Whether that change was permanent or situational remained to be seen. "Tell me about Eliza," I said. "You mentioned she's struggling?" James sighed. "Eliza has always defined herself by her victories. The failure of integrated care solutions was a blow to more than her bank account. It shattered her self-image. She invested nearly everything she inherited, convinced we could outmaneuver you through sheer will and connections. Pride comes before the fall," I murmured, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and unexpected sympathy. "She doesn't know I'm meeting with you," he continued. "She's not ready for that conversation yet." "You mean she's not ready to apologize?" He hesitated. "She's working through her own process. Eliza never found it easy to admit she was wrong, even as a child. Remember how she'd rearrange entire arguments rather than concede a single point? Despite myself, I smiled at the memory. like when she insisted that the car was red when it was clearly blue, then spent an hour explaining how blue was actually a type of red if you looked at it intellectually. Exactly. James laughed softly. Some things never change, but other things do. She's not the same person who helped orchestrate cutting you out of the will. None of us are the same people we were 4 years ago. This was undeniably true. The Alex who had driven away from our parents' house with nothing but determination and rage was not the same Alex sitting across from a successful brother, leading a thriving company, contemplating the possibility of reconciliation. "What happened to you, James?" I asked. "You had everything. A successful tech company, your share of the inheritance, connections. What changed?" He was quiet for a long moment, swirling the last of his wine before setting the glass down with deliberate care. "About 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with the same heart condition Dad had," he said finally. "It's manageable with medication, but it was a wake-up call. I started thinking about legacy, about what I'd leave behind if I died tomorrow. And I realized it wouldn't be much beyond financial success and broken relationships. I hadn't known about his health issues, and the news hit me with unexpected force. Our father's heart condition had been a constant shadow over his later years, and the thought of James facing the same challenge stirred complicated emotions. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuine concern breaking through my carefully maintained distance. "For now, yes. The prognosis is good with treatment, but it forced me to reevaluate everything." He looked at me intently. "When I saw how you'd built Parker Health, not just a successful company but something meaningful that actually helps people, I was proud and ashamed in equal measure. Proud of what my little sibling had accomplished, ashamed of how I'd abandoned the values our parents raised us with." The waiter arrived with our entrees, providing a momentary reprieve from the emotional intensity of the conversation. We ate in silence for a few minutes, both processing the revelations that had emerged. "Parker Health is expanding into pediatric care coordination next month," I said eventually, offering this piece of information like an olive branch. "We're partnering with children's hospitals nationwide to create specialized workflows for kids with complex medical needs." James's face brightened with genuine interest. "That's incredible. The market potential is significant, but more importantly, the impact on families dealing with childhood illness will be substantial." "That's the goal," I agreed. "We've been working with parent advocacy groups to design features that address their specific challenges." For the next hour, our conversation flowed more naturally as I shared details about Parker Health's growth, and James talked about his own company's evolution. It wasn't the easy camaraderie we'd shared as children, but it was light years beyond the frozen silence of the past 4 years. As we finished dessert, James reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small envelope on the table between us. "What's this?" I asked warily. "Not a trick or manipulation," he assured me. "It's a cashier's check for 1/3 of the proceeds from the sale of our parents' house, plus 1/3 of their investment portfolio, with interest calculated from the date of their passing." I stared at the envelope without touching it. "You're trying to buy my forgiveness?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm trying to make financial restitution for a clear wrong. It won't undo the betrayal or the pain we caused, but it's a tangible acknowledgement that the inheritance should have been shared equally. Your forgiveness, if it ever comes, will be separate from this." My hand hovered over the envelope. Part of me wanted to throw it back in his face, to declare that I didn't need his money now that I had built my own success. But another part recognized the symbolic importance of this gesture, not just the money itself, but the admission of wrongdoing it represented. "I'll think about it," I said, leaving the envelope untouched on the table. James nodded, neither surprised nor offended. "Fair enough. It's yours whenever you decide to take it, or not. No strings attached." As we left the restaurant, the night air cool against my face, I felt the weight of 4 years of estrangement pressing against the fragile beginnings of something that wasn't quite reconciliation, but was no longer active enmity. "Thank you for meeting me," James said as we reached the point where we would head in different directions. "I know it couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted. "But it wasn't as hard as I expected either." He smiled slightly. "Progress, then, perhaps. Can I call you sometime? Not to push for more than you're ready to give, just to stay connected?" I considered the request, weighing the risk of reopening old wounds against the possibility of healing them properly. "You can call," I said finally. "I might not always answer, but you can call." It was a small concession, but the relief on his face suggested it meant more than I had intended. We awkwardly shook hands, neither of us ready for the hug that would have once been natural, and parted ways. Walking back to my hotel, I pulled out my father's journal, opening it to a random page as I had begun doing since James returned it to me. Forgiveness is not a single act, but a process of reclaiming your own peace. It does not excuse the wrong, but prevents the wrong from continuing to damage your heart. Dad's words, as always, spoke directly to my current struggle. Forgiveness had always seemed like surrender, like allowing my siblings to escape the consequences of their actions. But what if it was actually the final step in my own liberation? What if holding on to resentment was the last remaining chain binding me to their betrayal? I didn't have answers that night, but for the first time in 4 years, I was asking different questions. The next morning, I flew home feeling oddly unsettled. Meeting with James had disrupted the clean narrative I had constructed. Betrayed sibling rises from ashes, builds empire, lives happily ever after without toxic family members. The reality was messier, with James showing genuine remorse, offering restitution, and complicating my righteous anger with his own health struggles and evident change of heart. Roland noticed my distraction during our weekly strategy meeting. "You're 1,000 miles away today," he observed after I missed a question for the 3rd time. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I had dinner with my brother last night." His eyebrows shot up. "The brother? The one who helped cut you out of your parents' will and then tried to create a knockoff of our company to steal the Medicor contract?" "The very same." "Well," he sat back, studying me carefully. "That's unexpected. How did it go?" "Complicated," I admitted. He apologized. Seems genuinely remorseful. Even offered financial restitution. Roland, who had become something of a mentor over the years, nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," I said, surprising myself with the admission. For so long, their betrayal has been a driving force, first in building Parker Health, then in pushing it to succeed beyond anyone's expectations. What if reconciliation somehow diminishes that drive? He smiled slightly. "If you're worried that making peace with your family will somehow deplete your entrepreneurial fire, I think you're underestimating yourself. Parker Health has grown beyond its origin story. It succeeds now because it solves real problems, has a talented team, and delivers measurable value, not because you're working to prove your siblings wrong." His assessment echoed my own recent realizations, but hearing it from someone else, someone who had witnessed my journey from the beginning, carried additional weight. "Besides," he continued, "holding grudges takes energy. Energy better spent on innovation, growth, and occasionally having an actual life outside this company." His pointed look reminded me of the many conversations we'd had about my workaholic tendencies. "Point taken," I acknowledged. "Speaking of growth, where are we with the Series C term sheet?" He allowed the subject change, and we spent the next hour discussing the upcoming funding round that would value Parker Health at over $500 million, a milestone that would have seemed impossible when I started with nothing but determination and $5,000 in cash. That evening, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, looking through old family photos. They had remained packed away in a storage box since I'd left my parents' house, too painful to revisit. Now, I spread them across my living room floor, studying the visual history of the Parkers. There was James teaching me to ride a bike, his hands steady on the seat as I grinned with mixed terror and delight. Eliza helping me with a science project, her perfectionist tendencies evident in the meticulously labeled diagram. The 5 of us at the beach, building an elaborate sand castle that had taken all day and washed away with the evening tide. Where had it all gone wrong? When had ambition and greed overtaken the genuine love that seemed so evident in these frozen moments? My phone rang, interrupting my contemplation. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something prompted me to answer. "Hello?" Silence, then a familiar voice I hadn't heard in 4 years. "Alex? It's Eliza." My heart hammered in my chest. "Eliza, James told me he met with you." Her voice was tightly controlled, revealing nothing. Wasn't sure you'd take my call." "Neither was I admitted. Another silence stretched between us, heavy with 4 years of unspoken words. "I don't know how to do this," she finally said, a rare admission of uncertainty from my always confident older sister. "I've prepared opening statements for multi-million-dollar cases with less anxiety than I feel right now." Despite everything, I found myself almost smiling at her characteristic bluntness. Maybe start with why you're calling. Right. I heard her take a deep breath. I'm calling because James said you agreed to speak with him, which suggests you might possibly be open to hearing from me as well. And because I owe you an apology that's 4 years overdue. Go on, I said, neither accepting nor rejecting this opening. What we did was wrong. Unequivocally, inexcusably wrong. The words came out in a rush, as if she'd rehearsed them but was still afraid she might lose her nerve. We manipulated Mom and Dad when they were vulnerable. We deliberately excluded you from discussions about the will. We convinced ourselves we were justified because you'd put your career on hold, because you weren't established yet, because we would take care of you. She paused, and I could almost see her composing herself, the attorney in her organizing her thoughts into a coherent argument. But those were lies we told ourselves to justify our greed. The truth is uglier and simpler. We saw an opportunity to get more for ourselves, and we took it, regardless of the cost to you or to our relationships. It was selfish, cruel, and contrary to everything our parents taught us. Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and I realized she was crying, something I had seen perhaps 3 times in our entire lives together. Eliza didn't cry. She calculated, strategized, and outmaneuvered, but she didn't cry. Do you know what the worst part was? I asked, my own voice unsteady. Not the money. Not even the betrayal itself. It was that you both looked me in the eye for weeks afterward, watching me care for our dying parents, knowing what you had done behind my back, and said nothing. I know, she whispered. There's no defense I can offer. No legal argument or precedent that justifies our actions. All I can say is that I'm sorry, Alex. Deeply, truly sorry for the pain we caused you. I closed my eyes, absorbing words I had once thought I would never hear from my proudest, most stubborn sibling. Why now, Eliza? Is it because Parker Health succeeded beyond anyone's expectations? Because your competing venture failed? Because James made the first move? She was quiet for a moment. All of that played a part. I won't deny it. Watching you build something remarkable while our own attempt failed was illuminating, but it's more than that. What then? Last month was Dad's birthday, she said softly. I went to the cemetery alone for the first time since the funeral. Usually James and I go together, but he was traveling. And sitting there, looking at their headstones, I suddenly had this overwhelming thought. They would be so ashamed of what we did to you, but so proud of what you've built despite us. It was exactly what I had thought countless times over the years, imagining our parents' reactions to both the betrayal and my subsequent success. The realization physically hurt, Eliza continued. I couldn't breathe thinking about how disappointed they would be in me, not for the business failure, but for betraying their values and my own sibling. I've been trying to work up the courage to call you ever since. 4 years of anger and hurt couldn't be erased by a single phone call, no matter how sincere the apology. But something shifted in me as I sat surrounded by childhood photos, listening to my sister's tearful confession. I'm still processing everything with James, I said carefully. This is a lot to take in at once. Of course, she said quickly. I don't expect forgiveness or even understanding right away. I just needed you to know that I recognize what we did was wrong, and I'm truly sorry for my part in it. I appreciate that, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of the words. It means something to hear you say it. Would you? She hesitated. Would you be open to meeting sometime? Not right away if you're not ready, but eventually? The question hung between us, weighted with possibilities both healing and harmful. I'm not ready yet, I admitted. But I might be, eventually. Let me process this, deal with things one step at a time. That's fair, she said, relief evident in her voice. More than fair. Thank you for even taking my call, Alex. It's more than I had any right to expect. After we hung up, I sat among the scattered photographs, feeling emotionally drained but oddly lighter. Both of my siblings had now acknowledged their wrongdoing, offered genuine apologies, and expressed desire for reconciliation. The script I had been following, betrayed sibling triumphantly succeeds while maintaining righteous anger, was being rewritten in real time, forcing me to consider a different path forward. Could there be a version of this story where success and forgiveness coexisted? where I maintained my hard-won independence and business empire while cautiously rebuilding family bonds. I didn't have answers that night, but for the first time, I was genuinely open to the questions. The next few months were a whirlwind of professional milestones and personal recalibration. Parker Health completed its Series C funding at a $525 million valuation, expanded into 3 new healthcare verticals, and crossed the threshold of 1 million patients managed through our platform. I was named Healthcare Entrepreneur of the Year by Innovation Quarterly, a recognition that would have once felt like the ultimate vindication, but now registered as simply one achievement among many. Personally, things evolved more cautiously. I spoke with James regularly, our conversations gradually becoming less awkward and more authentic. He sent me our father's collection of first-edition medical texts, books I had always admired but had left behind in my hasty departure 4 years earlier. The gesture touched me more deeply than I could express, these tangible connections to our dad arriving when I was finally ready to appreciate them. Eliza and I progressed more slowly, beginning with occasional text messages and eventually short phone calls. Her pride and my lingering hurt made our reconnection more complicated, but there was genuine effort on both sides. 6 months after my initial dinner with James, I finally decided what to do about the restitution he had offered. I had left the envelope untouched, unable to decide whether accepting the money would represent closure or somehow diminish the independence I had fought so hard to establish. The answer came to me while reviewing Parker Health's charitable initiatives. We had recently established a foundation focused on improving healthcare access for underserved communities, but it was still in its early stages, seeking its first major funding. I called James. "I've made a decision about the money," I said when he answered. "And?" His voice was carefully neutral. "I want to donate it to the Parker Health Foundation," I explained. "All of it. To establish a program specifically for training family caregivers in medically underserved areas. It feels like the right way to honor Mom and Dad while transforming our family's complicated history into something positive." The line was quiet for a moment. "I think that's perfect," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect. And if you're open to it, I'd like to match the donation. Double the impact." The offer caught me off guard. "You would do that?" "In a heartbeat. It's a meaningful use of the money, and a meaningful way to support what you've built." Something warm unfurled in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but its precursor, recognition of genuine change and good intent. "I'd like that," I said softly. "Thank you." 2 weeks later, the 3 of us gathered for the first time in nearly 5 years. The occasion was carefully chosen. The official announcement of the Parker Family Caregiver Initiative, a $5 million program jointly funded by James's matching donation and additional contributions from Eliza, who had insisted on participating once she heard about the plan. The foundation event was held at a hotel ballroom, with healthcare professionals, community partners, and media representatives in attendance. I had insisted it be a low-key affair by corporate standards, focusing on the program's goals rather than our family's reconciliation. Still, there was no avoiding the symbolic weight of the 3 Parker siblings appearing publicly together after years of estrangement. Eliza arrived first, immaculate as always in a tailored navy suit, but with a nervousness in her eyes that belied her confident posture. We had only seen each other twice since her apologetic phone call, both times in the neutral territory of a quiet cafe, our conversations still careful and measured. "The venue looks beautiful," she said, glancing around at the tasteful decorations. "Very appropriate for the foundation." "Thanks," I replied, feeling oddly shy. "The team worked hard on it." An awkward silence fell between us, 5 years of separation creating conversational landmines neither of us was sure how to navigate. "Alex," she said suddenly, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "before James arrives and things get busy, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've built. Not just the business success, though that's remarkable, but the purpose behind it. You've created something that matters." Coming from Eliza, achievement-oriented, pragmatic Eliza, who had always measured success in billable hours and courtroom victories, this recognition of purpose over profit felt significant. "That means a lot," I said honestly. "Especially from you." She smiled slightly. "Remember when we were kids and you insisted on setting up that neighborhood health clinic for all the stuffed animals? You charged everyone a penny for consultation, then donated all the money to the Real Health Clinic downtown. I laughed, surprised by the memory. I'd forgotten about that. Dad helped me make appointment cards out of index cards. You were always meant for this, she said softly. Creating something healing. We should have seen that. The moment was interrupted by James's arrival, but the brief exchange had shifted something in my relationship with Eliza, a recognition of my path that felt, in some small way, like vindication of the choices I'd made both before and after our parents' deaths. The event itself was a success, with extensive media coverage and enthusiastic support from the healthcare community. Standing on stage between my siblings as we presented the initiative, I experienced a strange doubling of perspective, simultaneously aware of how far we had come from the bitter division of 5 years ago and how far we still had to go before anything like true family harmony could be restored. The Parker Family Caregiver Initiative, I explained to the assembled crowd, was born from personal experience. When our parents became ill, I witnessed firsthand the challenges family caregivers face, often with minimal training or support. This program will provide education, resources, and community connection for those undertaking one of life's most demanding and important roles. What I didn't say, what remained unspoken among the three of us, was how this initiative also represented an attempt to transform our family's painful past into something healing for others. How it acknowledged, without explicitly stating, that our parents would have wanted their estate to benefit those in need rather than fuel division among their children. After the formal presentation, as guests mingled and networked, a reporter approached the three of us. "This is the first time the Parker siblings have appeared publicly together in years," she observed. "Does this initiative represent a personal reconciliation as well as a professional collaboration?" James and Eliza looked to me, tacitly acknowledging that this was my question to answer. "Families are complicated," I said carefully. "Ours is no exception. What I can say is that we're united in our commitment to this initiative and the difference it can make for family caregivers. The rest is our private journey." The reporter seemed disappointed by my diplomatic non-answer, but moved on to questions about the program's specifics. Once she left, James squeezed my shoulder gently. "Well navigated," he murmured. "I've had practice with the press," I replied. "Parker Health's growth has put me in front of microphones more often than I ever expected." "It's more than that," Eliza observed. "You've developed a genuine presence. Authority without arrogance. It's impressive." Coming from her, this was high praise indeed. The three of us shared a brief smile, a moment of connection that felt both foreign and familiar, like rediscovering a language once fluently spoken but long unused. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and we were gathering our things to leave, James suggested dinner at a nearby restaurant. I hesitated, emotional reserves depleted by the day's symbolic weight. "Another time," I said. "I think I need to process today first." They both nodded, understanding rather than offended. 5 years ago, they might have pushed, might have called my withdrawal childish or dramatic. Now, they respected the boundaries I still needed. "Of course," James said. "It's been a significant day. But a good one, I think," Eliza added cautiously, the question implicit in her tone. I considered this, weighing the complicated emotions the day had stirred. "Yes," I said finally. "Surprisingly good." As I drove home that night, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. The Parker Family Caregiver Initiative had created a new context for our relationship, one built around something constructive rather than the destructive history of betrayal and retaliation. We weren't simply siblings trying to repair familial bonds. We were partners in a meaningful project that honored our parents' memory in a way that felt authentic and healing. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a path toward something that might eventually resemble peace. The next year brought unprecedented growth for Parker Health. We expanded internationally, acquired 2 complementary healthcare technology startups, and prepared for an IPO that would value the company at over $2 billion. The scrappy startup, born from betrayal and determination, had evolved into an industry leader, transforming healthcare coordination across continents. My personal evolution paralleled the company's growth. The driven, revenge-motivated founder gradually gave way to a more balanced leader, one who could delegate effectively, maintain healthy boundaries, and occasionally take vacations without checking email every hour. I started dating again after years of focusing exclusively on the company, eventually meeting Claire, a pediatric nurse practitioner whose insight into healthcare challenges made her both a compatible partner and a valuable sounding board for Parker Health initiatives. My relationship with my siblings continued its careful reconstruction. We established a monthly family dinner, sometimes awkward, sometimes surprisingly enjoyable, but consistently maintained as we navigated our new dynamic. Old patterns occasionally emerged: Eliza's controlling tendencies, James's diplomatic avoidance of conflict, my stubborn independence. But now, with the painful past acknowledged rather than ignored, we could recognize these patterns and sometimes even laugh about them. The Parker Family Caregiver Initiative flourished, expanding to 15 cities and helping thousands of families navigate the challenges of home health care. My siblings and I found common purpose in supporting its growth, each contributing our distinct professional expertise: my healthcare knowledge, James's technology insights, Eliza's legal and administrative acumen. Working together on the initiative created opportunities for healing that might never have emerged in purely personal interactions. When disagreements arose about program direction or resource allocation, we were forced to communicate clearly, listen to each other's perspectives, and find compromise, skills our family had never excelled at historically. 2 years after the Foundation's launch, as we celebrated its success at a gala fundraiser, I found myself sharing a quiet moment with Eliza on the venue's balcony, both of us taking a break from the crowded event inside. "Do you remember that awful fight we had when you were 15? She asked unexpectedly. "When I found out you'd borrowed my car without permission and dented the fender?" I winced at the memory. "How could I forget? You didn't speak to me for 2 weeks." "I was thinking about that yesterday," she said, gazing out at the city lights. "How absolutely furious I was over a minor dent in a car. How self-righteous and unforgiving." "You had a right to be angry," I pointed out. "I took your car without asking." She shook her head. The anger was proportionate. The response wasn't. 2 weeks of silent treatment over a dented fender? It was the same pattern we repeated as adults: disproportionate response, inability to forgive, holding on to grievances. I was surprised by her self-awareness. "We've all had those tendencies." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I've been thinking about forgiveness lately, what it means, why it's so difficult, how essential it is for moving forward." She turned to face me directly. "You've shown remarkable grace, Alex. Agreeing to work with us on the Foundation, rebuilding some kind of relationship after what we did. Many people would have maintained their justified anger indefinitely." The observation caught me off guard. I had never thought of my gradual thawing toward my siblings as grace, more like practical necessity, emotional evolution, the natural wearing down of rage over time. "I'm not sure it was grace so much as exhaustion," I admitted. "Anger requires energy. Eventually, I needed that energy for other things." "Still," she insisted, "you could have shut the door permanently. No one would have blamed you. The fact that you left it even slightly ajar says something important about who you are." We stood in companionable silence for a few minutes, the muffled sounds of the gala floating through the balcony doors. "We'll never be what we might have been without the betrayal," Eliza said finally. "I know that. Too much happened, too much was broken. But I'm grateful for what we've managed to build from the wreckage." Her uncharacteristic vulnerability moved me. "I am too," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "Not grateful for what happened, but for where we've arrived despite it." She smiled slightly. The Parker siblings, stubbornly making the best of things since childhood. It wasn't complete healing. It wasn't the unconditional love and trust that might have flourished in an alternate timeline where betrayal had never occurred. But it was something real and valuable, a hard-won understanding, a consciously chosen connection rather than merely an inherited one. When Parker Health Technologies went public the following spring, it was the culmination of 7 years of relentless work, strategic vision, and occasional good fortune. The company I had built from nothing, fueled initially by betrayal and the desperate need to prove my siblings wrong, was now valued at $2.3 billion. My personal stake, even after multiple funding rounds of dilution, was worth over $400 million. The financial pages lauded the Parker Health success story, the innovative platform, the impressive market penetration, the perfect timing in a healthcare landscape increasingly focused on coordination and home care. What they couldn't capture was the personal journey that had paralleled the business one, the transformation from betrayed sibling seeking revenge to successful entrepreneur finding purpose beyond vindication. On the morning of the IPO, as the Parker Health executive team gathered to watch the opening bell, Roland pulled me aside. "Remember that first investor meeting?" he asked with a grin. "When you had nothing but mock-ups and determination, and Victoria took a chance on the angry kid with a healthcare vision?" I laughed. Hard to forget. I was running on spite and ramen noodles. His expression turned more serious. "I've seen a lot of companies built on a lot of different foundations. The ones started purely for revenge or to prove someone wrong usually flame out. The founder either gets what they wanted and loses interest, or the negative motivation burns them out. But somewhere along the way, your why shifted. The company became about something bigger than proving your siblings wrong." "It had to," I acknowledged. "Otherwise, I wouldn't have survived the journey." "Exactly. And that's why we're standing here today, about to ring the opening bell on a multi-billion-dollar public company." He squeezed my shoulder. "You should be incredibly proud, Alex, not just of the business success, but of the personal evolution it represents." As we rejoined the team for the ceremonial bell ringing, I scanned the crowd gathering for the event. In the back of the room stood James and Eliza, who had flown in specifically for the occasion at my invitation. Our reconciliation remained a work in progress, but their presence today felt right, a recognition of the full circle this journey had traveled. The IPO was a spectacular success, with the stock closing 43% above the offering price on its first day of trading. The business pages celebrated the healthcare unicorn and its visionary founder. Industry analysts projected continued growth as Parker Health expanded into new markets and healthcare verticals. That evening, I hosted a small celebration at my home, not the lavish party one might expect for such a milestone, but an intimate gathering of those who had been part of the journey from its earliest days. Victoria, who had taken a chance on an angry, determined entrepreneur with limited resources. Roland, who had provided experienced leadership when the company needed it most. Raj, who had translated my healthcare vision into technical reality. And, somewhat surprisingly even to me, my siblings. As champagne flowed and conversations buzzed around my living room, I found myself momentarily overwhelmed by the improbable path that had led to this moment. 7 years earlier, I had sat in a cheap motel room with $5,000 to my name, plotting revenge against the siblings who had betrayed me. Now, those same siblings were in my home, celebrating the success of a company valued at over $2 billion, our relationship carefully rebuilt on new foundations of honesty and respect. Claire found me in the kitchen, taking a moment alone to process it all. "You okay?" she asked, wrapping her arms around my waist from behind. "Just taking it all in," I replied, leaning back against her. "It's a lot, from homeless and betrayed to IPO and family reconciliation in 7 years." "Yeah, I'd say that qualifies as a lot," she kissed my shoulder. "You've achieved something remarkable, Alex. Not just the company, though that's extraordinary, but the whole journey." I turned to face her. "Sometimes I still can't believe we're here. That Parker Health succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. That James and Eliza are in my living room, genuinely celebrating that success rather than resenting it." "People can change," she observed. "Not all people, not all the time, but it happens. Your siblings had to face some hard truths about themselves. That's rare and valuable." "As did I acknowledged. "I had to let go of revenge as my primary motivation. Had to find purpose beyond proving them wrong." "And you did," she smiled. "That's the most impressive transformation of all." Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself alone with my siblings on the terrace overlooking the city. The three of us stood side by side, an echo of our positioning at the foundation launch 2 years earlier, but with a more comfortable silence between us. "Remember when we built that treehouse in the backyard?" James asked suddenly. "Dad helped with the frame, but he made us figure out the rest ourselves." I smiled at the memory. "It took us all summer." Eliza insisted on drawing up architectural plans, "which neither of you followed," she pointed out, but she was smiling too. "We argued about every nail and board, but we built it," James said. And it lasted for years. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it resonated nonetheless. We had been destroyed and rebuilt something different, not the same trust and love that might have existed in an alternate timeline where betrayal never occurred, but something intentional and hard-won. "I have something for each of you," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out 2 small jewelry boxes, a tradition I've started for key Parker Health milestones. They opened the boxes to find identical gold tie pins for James and a matching brooch for Eliza, each engraved with the Parker Health logo and the IPO date. "The executive team all received these today," I explained. "I wanted you to have them too. Not because you're directly part of Parker Health, but because in a strange way, you were part of its creation. Without what happened 7 years ago, this company would never have existed." They both looked startled, then thoughtful as they processed the implication. "That's remarkably generous framing," Eliza said finally. "Most people would not view betrayal as a gift." "It wasn't," I clarified, "at all. But what grew from it, that turned out to be valuable beyond measure, not just financially, but in terms of purpose and impact." James studied the tie pin, running his finger over the engraved date. "Life takes strange turns. If someone had told us 7 years ago that we'd be standing here today, celebrating your multi-billion-dollar company going public, while wearing symbolic reminders of how our betrayal inadvertently launched that company," Eliza added wryly, "it would have seemed impossible." "Life is occasionally poetic in its outcomes," I observed. "Not always fair, not always kind, but sometimes unexpectedly appropriate." We shared a moment of silent acknowledgement, of the journey traveled, the prices paid, the unexpected destinations reached. It wasn't perfect reconciliation, too much had happened for that fairy tale ending, but it was something authentic and hard-earned, a family reshaped by crisis, separated by betrayal, and cautiously reconnected through growth, honesty, and the passage of healing time. The following morning, with the IPO celebration behind me and the future of Parker Health as a public company ahead, I drove to the cemetery where our parents were buried. I hadn't visited in years, finding it too painful after the betrayal to stand at their graves, knowing what had transpired in their names. But now, with the company established, some measure of family healing underway, and my own heart finally at peace with the journey, it felt right to reconnect with them, to share, in whatever metaphysical way might exist, the outcomes of the difficult path their deaths and the subsequent betrayal had set in motion. The cemetery was quiet in the early morning light, dew still clinging to the grass as I made my way to their adjacent headstones. I placed fresh flowers between them and sat on the small bench facing the graves. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," I said softly, feeling only slightly self-conscious about speaking aloud. "It's been a while. A lot has happened." For the next hour, I talked to them as if they could hear, about Parker Health's growth and mission, about the foundation established in their name, about the cautious reconciliation with James and Eliza. I shared my pride in what I'd built, my ongoing healing from the betrayal, my hope that they would approve of how I'd responded to unimaginable circumstances. "The company went public yesterday," I told them. $2.3 billion valuation. Not bad for starting with almost nothing, right? I think you'd be proud of what it's become, not because of the money, but because it's helping people. Making healthcare work better for families going through what we went through. A gentle breeze rustled the flowers I'd brought, and I allowed myself to imagine it as some form of response. "I'm not sure what you would think about everything with James and Eliza," I continued. "The betrayal, the years of silence, the careful rebuilding we're attempting now. I'd like to believe you'd approve of my eventually opening the door to reconciliation, even though what they did was wrong. You always taught us that family was about more than blood. It was about choices, about showing up, about doing the difficult work of loving imperfect people." I traced my fingers over their names engraved in stone, feeling a mixture of grief and gratitude that seemed appropriate for the complex journey of the past 7 years. "I don't know if I've fully forgiven them," I admitted. "Maybe I never will, completely. But I've found a way forward that doesn't require either pretending it never happened or remaining permanently estranged. I hope, you would see that as progress." As I sat there, memories flowing freely for the first time in years, I realized that Parker Health had become the most fitting tribute I could have created for my parents, more meaningful than any inheritance, more lasting than any monument. The company embodied their values of caring for others, finding solutions to challenging problems, and creating positive impact in the world. And in a strange, painful way, so did my journey with my siblings. The hard-won understanding that people can change, that broken relationships can be partially mended through honest effort, that moving forward doesn't require forgetting the past, but rather integrating it into a new reality. I stood finally, placing a hand on each headstone one last time. "I built my own empire," I said softly, "and I never looked back until I was ready to look forward in a new way. I hope that would make you proud." Driving away from the cemetery, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me even through Parker Health's most successful moments. The company would continue to grow, evolve, and impact healthcare delivery worldwide. My relationship with my siblings would continue its careful healing, never returning to what might have been but perhaps becoming something thoughtfully reconstructed from experience and choice rather than merely inherited obligation. And I would continue my own journey, no longer defined primarily as the betrayed sibling or even as the successful entrepreneur, but as someone who had transformed pain into purpose and betrayal into something better than revenge, a life well lived on my own terms. My siblings had shut me out of the will, intending to limit my possibilities. Instead, their actions had inadvertently launched me into creating possibilities they could never have imagined, for myself, for the patients served by Parker Health, and even, ironically, for our family's eventual healing. I had built my own empire, and in doing so I had built myself, stronger, wiser, and finally free from the shadow of betrayal that had once threatened to define me. As I merged onto the highway, heading toward the Parker Health offices where my team awaited to begin our first day as a public company, I smiled at the perfect circle this journey had traveled. From nothing to empire, from betrayal to purpose, from rage to something that, while not perfect forgiveness, looked remarkably like peace. And that, I decided, was a success story worth celebrating, not because of the billions of dollars involved, but because of the priceless personal growth it represented. I had never looked back in defeat or despair, but now I could look forward with hope, purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of having transformed the greatest betrayal of my life into its greatest catalyst for growth. That was the true empire I had built, not just a company, but a life reclaimed from the ashes of betrayal and reconstructed into something more magnificent than revenge could ever have provided.